Welcome everyone. My name's Jess Wilson. I'm the CEO of Good Things Australia, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the ADIA October Meetup, where we're going to be exploring and doing a deep dive into a report that we recently released on the economic benefit of overcoming digital exclusion. I'm thrilled to welcome Nicki, Hutley and Tricia with me today, and I'm going to introduce them. But before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from the beautiful lands of the Darug and Gudda people and pay my respects to elders past and present. It is a great privilege to live and work on this beautiful land, which always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We continue to work towards supporting reconciliation in our country and ensuring that there is equal digital inclusion for our First Nations people across the country. So for those of you who are just joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat panel. It is brilliant to have you here today. We launched this amazing report on the 10th of October in Parliament House. So it was a couple of weeks ago. It feels a bit of a whirlwind. So it is brilliant for us to be able to do this online now as well, because Nicki has worked very hard at this, and Trish also has presented and has been delivering programs across her region for many years, supporting people to build their digital inclusion. So look, I'm going to introduce them first properly and do the proper intros so that you all know who they are. Nicki, Hutley, you will probably have recognised from the television, I think. She is an independent economist. She's one of Australia's leading economists, in fact, and she's worked in a career over the financial investment markets and as a consultant on economic policy. She's worked in the corporate world, including as a partner in Deloitte, but she's also a chief economic advisor to the Customer-Owned Banking Association now as well. She's a member of the Australian Business Economists Executive Committee, and she's the immediate past president as well of the Economic Society of Australia. She's also on the Climate Council and is a member of the Finance Women's Index Advisory Committee. So you will agree with me that Nicki has all of the expertise required to be able to complete this piece of work for us, and it has been an absolute pleasure working with Nicki on this report. So huge thanks, Nicki, and look forward to hearing more from you. Trish has been delivering programs to people in her community forever. She is the founder of the Tec Exec and has been a Good Things Network partner for, I think it's about close to 7 years now, Trish, maybe 6 or 7. She's an expert trainer. So if you need to know something about how to use your phone, whether it is Apple or Android, Trish can help you. She's passionate about empowering regional communities, and not only in digital training, but also ensuring they have access to, the technology and the data and internet connectivity. So she has been working on a new initiative called Connect Badella, where she has introduced the Sky-Fi internet hubs, which can travel around ensuring that community organisations have access to the internet no matter where they are. So Trish is committed to building a sustainable model for a future-proof regional communities, and so it is a pleasure to have you here, Trish, and I look forward to you sharing some of the knowledge that you have about the work that you do in the program in the community.
Thank you, Jess.
Now I've done the intros, I have to do some housekeeping. So we make sure that everybody knows how we're running this session. So the session is being recorded, so just so that you are aware, so we will be able to share the link ahead after this. We will be having a Q&A. So if you have detailed questions about economic modelling, then Nicki will be available to answer those questions, and will be the best person, because I will not be. So we will be having a Q&A. You can put the Q&A in the Q&A panel. There's a little section down the bottom that says Q&A. Please put your questions and answers in there. We definitely want you to be involved, so please put your Q&A there, but we're going to do the presentation first and then do the questions after. So if you've got a burning one, please put it in there while you're thinking of it so you don't forget it. So we'll have a session after that. But also use the chat feature. If you want to make a comment or you want to talk to somebody else that's on the webinar today, then please feel free to use the chat panel. as well. We'll be keeping an eye on that too. So the ADIA, I am definitely a part of the Strategic Governance Committee. The ADIA has been established since 2017, so 7 years ago now, and it's a shared initiative between 500 different business, government, academic and community organisations, all passionate about overcoming digital exclusion and ensuring digital inclusion in Australia. It's supported by Info Exchange and it is backed by Google, Telstra and TAS networks. And we have participants all over the country. The vision of the ADIA is to build a digitally inclusive Australia where everyone is equipped to fully participate in the economy and society. And they work across all three pillars of digital inclusion: affordability, accessibility, and digital ability. So it's a pleasure for us to be here today. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro to Good Things Australia in case you don't know much about us. And then we will get really into it. So let me just make sure that my technology is working today and can go ahead with that. So for those of you who don't know Good Things Australia, we've also been in Australia since 2017. Our purpose is to close the digital divide so no one is left behind. And we have, in the time that we've been established here in Australia, supported 2 million people to build their digital skills and confidence. We distribute grants to people in the community. So if you are delivering digital inclusion programs to people in your community and you have not accessed some grants from us, you need to have a look at our website because there are grants available to support you to do that. We have about 4,000 community partners all over the country. We know that our programs not only make people safer online, make sure that they have improved digital skills and confidence, but they also make sure that people are more socially connected. And that is the real reason we're doing this. And the information that we'll provide today talks about the benefits of overcoming digital exclusion, and being connected to people in your society is one of those. We deliver a range of different programs, so Be Connected, Digital Sisters. We support people with intellectual disability through our Bridge program. For those of you who are participating in Get Online Week a couple of weeks ago, a huge thank you. We had thousands of events all over the country. We've delivered programs on digital health, and we're connecting bank branches through Bendigo Bank with other community partners to build that digital community together in local spaces. But we know that digital exclusion, nearly 1 in 4 Australians are digitally excluded. I know that as this is an ADIA webinar, I am preaching to the converted here, but it is important for us to just remind ourselves the kind of key areas of digital exclusion: access, affordability, and ability. The people that are most at risk of digital exclusion are people on low incomes, with low education. People living in regional and remote communities continue to miss out. Women, new migrants and refugees, older people, people with disabilities and First Nations communities. So there's a whole range of Australia that miss out, and 1 in 4 are digitally excluded. 1 in 10 highly digitally excluded. And I know that Nicki will talk more about that in a minute. But I just wanted to make sure that we've got the focus of this on the people that we are trying to support. This is key. She's from one of our Digital Sisters programs in Melbourne, in Yarraville Community Centre. She was so grateful to have access to support so that she could improve her ability to get online and make sure that she had a job to be able to greater settle in Australia. So I think this is the real reason why we are absolutely here today, is to talk about how do we make sure that people are not left behind. But it is now my pleasure to introduce again Nicki Hutley. Before we do that, I'm just going to make sure that you know that there is a QR code on the bottom of this slide where you can download the report. I know that the team will be putting the link to the report in the chat panel as well, but please feel free to use the QR code and download a copy of the report that Nicki is going to talk you through now. So I'm going to stop sharing so that, so that I can, there we go, stop sharing so that Nicki can do that. And Nicki, I'm going to hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jess, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm joining from Dagenham country on the Central Coast. Absolutely beautiful. I was just saying to Jess not long ago, I was out on on Lake Cochrane, enjoying the beautiful waterways and connecting to my country, and really does lift one's spirits for the day. So I'm going to share my slides here. There we go. Whoops, share. Show how good my digital skills are this afternoon. All right, is that good? Can you see that one? No? Don't tell me I've got
We
a problem.
We can see, but you need to do present. Yeah,
there we go.
Perfect.
There we go.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Now, I should just say that all of the information that I'm going to talk about this morning is in much more detail in the report. And I will, if people have questions afterwards, more technical questions, if you want to, through good things, sort of contact me, I'm more than happy to help out. But without further ado, let's get into the approach. So from a high level, there were a number of things that we needed to do. And can I just say at the outset, this was hard. Dr. Andrew Leigh, who some of you might know, who's the Federal Assistant Minister for Treasury and Employment and half a dozen other things, has a PhD in economics, and he's set up the Australian Centre for Evaluation, and he loves randomised control trials as the gold standard, so that you can compare cohorts and say, look at this, we know this program is working because this cohort got these outcomes and this one didn't. That's basically not only incredibly expensive, but incredibly difficult to do in this sort of thing. So we had to basically use the data that were available to us. That includes a lot of data from the Bureau of Statistics, from the Hildred survey data, Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, all of those sorts of public data sources, as well as very extensive surveying results done by Good Things themselves from the people who had undertaken Be Connected, so that we understood what the outcomes for those cohorts were. So we had matched outcomes. And that was really important because we needed to know precisely what the change was, not only what the change was that was experienced, what we call the effect size, but also for whom those outcomes were important, because not everybody places equal importance on the types of outcomes that we looked at. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there. So starting off, we looked at, well, what were the outcomes? Now, there was some research done by Good Things in the UK, and they had identified several of the things, or most of the things that we have got. We looked at a few other things. We looked at things like employment. How did digital skills enable better employment, going from unemployed to employed? What did it mean for health outcomes, for example? What might it mean to access different types of services? And we looked at the literature to identify what were the potential outcomes. Then we looked to see what data were present so that we could actually work out and calculate what the impact was. The first data we looked at was estimating the cohort size. Now, for this, we only looked at the most excluded, the highly excluded cohort, 9.4%. Even that, I say only, but 1 in 10 is still a lot, not quite as much as 1 in 4. So it's likely that these are conservative estimates, because we really said you're highly excluded, this is likely to impact you. We didn't want to overstate. But obviously, if you're going with 1 in 10 instead of 1 in 4, you're underestimating by, well, a factor of 2.5. So it is possible these numbers, for a range of reasons, will be much higher. Then, as I said, we needed to understand the percentage for whom the outcome was important. So not only who was affected, sorry, I should go just going back to that. So, for example, with let's take unemployment, and I'll go into more detail when I get through some of the examples. But we looked specifically at the cohort of unemployed who were actively looking for work. So not even, we excluded things like long-term unemployed who had disconnected. So it was really very much people who were in the active stage of looking for work, and we took 9.4% of that number of people, for example. For the health side of things, we looked at 80% of people don't use online telehealth services. So we looked at what would happen to if 9.4% of that cohort of people aged from 18 to, and we only looked at adults 18 to 80 were able to engage more with online with telehealth. We then looked at the effect size. As I said before, we looked at the survey data to say who actually improved, had a significant improvement in their skills as a result of doing a Be Connected course. So how well are these programs helping people to get specific outcomes and outcomes that are important to them? And then once we'd done that, we had to apply a value to each outcome. So things like employment, you obviously take the standard economic methods for doing this in any type of cost benefit analysis that you look at the median income. In some cases, we looked only at the minimum wage because we felt that with low skills, you're likely to have more entry-level jobs. So again, taking a really conservative approach so that this modeling, I believe, is fairly, is very robust, and doesn't take anything for granted in terms of the assumptions that we make. That said, that means that there's potentially quite a lot of upside, and it means that there are things that we couldn't include because we didn't necessarily have enough data to give us a robust number. And I'll come to those at the end, but I'm just going to go through the different outcomes that we did model and talk to you a little bit about how that worked. So the first of those was moving from unemployed to employed, which I mentioned before. There's a large number of people who are actively unemployed, several 100,000. We looked at initially 9.4% of those, and we looked at other research that said, what are the level of the amount of jobs in the economy where you would need a basic level of skills? So there's lots of jobs where you need quite high levels of skills, and we excluded those again. So we ended up with, less than 50,000 target cohort for this, who are people who were likely to be able to move from unemployed to employed as a result of having those basic skills. And that's things like you might think about if you're a waiter in a restaurant cafe, you often need to know how to use a tablet to take an order. Something as simple as that. Even a basic office job, you need to know how to answer an email, maybe even do some social media. But there are some fairly basic skills that you need to have, even for low entry jobs. Even more so, jobs are advertised now more and more online. So half of the jobs that are out there are advertised in online platforms. Another quarter of those jobs are advertised through social media. So if you don't have access to the internet, or you don't have good skills, or you don't have a robust connection, then you're going to actually miss out on the opportunities that are out there. So we looked at those for whom who had experienced, who said this was important for them in the survey, and who had experienced a significant increase in their skills after that, doing the course, upgrading their skills. And then we said, right, for those people, you will get a minimum wage. And that means that you will be not reliant on government support, because the minimum wage is still fairly low, but that your reliance on government support would be much, much lower. So government outgoings are reduced, taxation increases because you still pay a little bit of tax on the minimum wage. And so government benefits from that, and obviously the individuals benefit from that outcome as well. And that was a fairly small outcome, $9.4 million. Each of these outcomes is for 1 year's results. So we say in the course of a year, if you took this average number of people who were affected in this way, this is what would happen. Obviously, there's more people coming into the population every year who need to have those skills updated. So that's that particular platform. And again, very conservative estimates. The next one was moving to a more skilled job. So there are less than 1 in 5, but there are jobs that are out there where you don't need to have digital skills. But by acquiring those skills, we know that the more skilled a worker becomes, the better their wages become. And very conveniently, Amazon Web Services did a similar study about what that looked like, going from both basic skills to high skills, but also from zero skills to basic skills. And so we took that cohort, people who were in a low-skilled job using Australian skills data, and said, what happens if you were able to move 9.4% of those to a higher job? And we also then again pared that back a little bit, because some people that wasn't an important thing. Obviously, you know, much older Australians, if you're 80, you might hopefully be enjoying your retirement by then. So we looked at a narrower cohort for that group as well. I think we took it up to only the age of 60. And that delivered us $65 million over the course of a year. And finally, in the work or the labour force impacts, we looked at accessing volunteer work. Volunteer work isn't included in the national accounts, but it is an incredibly important part of the economy. We know that it delivers many, many millions of dollars towards, in fact, billions of dollars in value of unpaid work that people do. And again, we measure this by using a minimum wage, although many of the skills that people will do when they're volunteering are in fact that should be valued at a higher level. What really surprised me about this was not only we know that the number of volunteers is declining, and it's really important that we try and engage as many people as possible. So we assumed that of the digitally excluded population over 18, that same proportion, around a third of people would opt for volunteering if they had the right skills to do so. I was really shocked that a third of volunteering done online. And not only that, you've got a lot of platforms, including government volunteering platforms, are online as well. You know, the world is there's almost no aspect of our lives that isn't online. So if you're not connected in some ways, you're just missing out on so many things well beyond, you know, important social connections. This economic engagement is really important too, and important for all of us, because we want to, you know, we know how important productivity is to the economy. And so the volunteering was similar in value to the moving to a skilled job. And we basically had close to 150 million for those three per year for those three items from the labour force all together. You can see from hopefully from all the numbers I'm throwing with you, and apologies if I'm going too fast or being a little bit nerdy. As I said, all of this information is set out in the report. I've tried to make it as clear as possible, so that both economists and non-economists can hopefully follow the methodology to understand the approach that we took. The next group, if you like, were around accessing services and social inclusion together. Reducing social exclusion is obviously, I'm sure everybody on this call would know, and as Jess said before, incredibly important. Of course, there are some downsides to certain aspects of social media, but a lot of the research, and I did look carefully into this, shows an awful lot of benefit as well. That connection with like-minded people. I know myself, I'm a massively nerdy, keen birder, Twitcher, and I love getting online and sharing with other people where's the good place to go, what we've all seen, sharing our photographs. And it's a wonderful way to connect with people that you may not live close to, but you know, you can share that passion, share skills and expertise, and it's just a lovely way to be connected. And of course, for many people, that that touching base is really important. Again, from my personal experience, I have a brother who lives in the UK. I have a mum who's aging, luckily still at home, but for her to be able to WhatsApp the family that's in the UK on a regular basis is incredibly important for her well-being and mental health, and also for theirs to know that she's getting on okay, and being able to support, you know, when things are not going quite right. So for valuing social exclusion. And this was a really important factor for, I think, over 90% of people. And we also got very good skills results improvement for this one in the survey that was done. But valuing that, obviously, say, well, how do you value somebody's well-being from being more included? And very fortunately, another economic consulting group had done this in relation to some volunteering work down in Victoria, and they had looked at what the social inclusion aspect of that particular program was. And they do that by, it's what we economists call contingent valuation, often also called stated preference, sometimes revealed preference. In this case, it was a stated preference, which simply means that people said, well, I would value the outcome that I get, the improvement in my well-being from participating in this program at $75 a year. And that's kind of intuitively good. You understand it because if you think about, well, what might it cost to join a club and, you know, go and play bridge once a month, or go and, you know, be involved in some sort of association. That's kind of what you might pay for an annual membership fee. If you're, it certainly is when you're a nerdy economist, if you wanted to join the Economic Society. So we know that passes the sniff test, and that's what we used for that. And so again, remember, we're talking about 1 in 10 of the population, around 90% of them said this was really important. And that gave us, with that very conservative value, $25 million, almost $26 million a year. That takes us on to telehealth. This, again, was an interesting one. The savings that we have got here are all time savings. So not having to go to travel to and from your GP. And we were able to find the average time travel distance on other research through our literature review. What we didn't see strong evidence of at this stage was improved actual health outcomes. But we know, again, intuitively, that people, particularly in rural and remote communities who don't necessarily have access to experts and who would have to travel very long distances, who have very long wait times, would likely have increased health outcomes. We did see some research that showed that in a clinical setting within a hospital, public hospital, that doctors said they were able to see roughly an extra 2 to 3 patients per day. That's per day, which is obviously a big shift in productivity. But the overarching conclusion was that the health system itself needed to take better advantage of the productivity gains and become more streamlined before we could count those benefits. So we're literally in this one just allowing for the time travel savings, so that I don't know why it is, but whenever you go on for an online health consultation, there seems to me to be far less delay than when you sit in a waiting room. I don't know why. So you get a double benefit of not having to travel and having to wait less time as well, which is great. So that's all measured in terms of, again, we do this as a standard economic convention, which allows us to measure through the minimum wage of what we call the opportunity cost of our time. Less than only around 1 in 5 people rather use telehealth at the moment, which is surprisingly low. Obviously, the government is trying to get more people to do that. People who did do it, close to 80% or just under 80% said that they would do it again. So again, we only applied that number. We didn't say everybody would use this. We, again, looked at the numbers who said it was important. We looked at those who said, it was a positive experience. And we looked at those who said, for whom it was important, who'd had increased skills. So for each of these outcomes that we're looking at, you can see each time we applied different lenses, we paired back the potential cohort who could benefit to make sure that we weren't overestimating anything. We erred on the side of caution. Again, similar for accessing MyGov, this is no longer just about tax or accessing your health records. So many state government services are there, things like accessing support for bushfire and flood recovery programs, domestic violence support programs. I mean, the list is absolutely endless. And luckily, the audit office has done a review and suggested that there's very, very significant savings for people not having to go into an office, but also even just in terms of telephone waiting times, also very significant. So very significant time savings again there. And finally, looking at retail services, online retail services, and improved financial safety, avoidance of online fraud. Online retail services, there's some good research that shows that the more people go online, there's an increase in the number of opportunities online, and that on average, that increases your buying power by around 1 percentage point a year, 1% a year, sorry. Now, that might not sound like much, but when you multiply it across the 13% of people who are not using online at all, most of whom you would assume are not doing because they are digitally excluded, and we only took a small portion of them, you still got an extra $20 million a year through what we call consumer surplus. So people being able to purchase things at a lower price than they would if they went to the shops. So that's a benefit in their pockets. And finally, on the scams, even though we hear lots of stories about people being scammed every year with tens of thousands of dollars, the average across all Australians is only a few $100s. And so we took a very, conservative approach and said, if we improve skills so people know what to look out for as they not only go online, but stay online, then we can potentially save close to $30 million a year in avoided scams and improved financial safety. And all of that leads us to total benefits per year of around $467 million, so getting up towards $500 million. Now, I'm getting close to the end of my time, so I'll just talk about the things that we didn't. That's a very big number, and it's a very conservative number. Remember, we're talking about the 1 in 10, not the 1 in 4. So, you could easily bump that up if you were taking some brave assumptions there about how many of the 1 in 4 would be excluded from some of these things. But more than that, there are other things that we weren't able to include, which would give you a much bigger number again. And specifically, I want to talk about education. We know starting a business is important. Safety during emergency events. I did talk to a number of people in the emergency services and the emergency leaders on climate action group, whom I work with at the Climate Council. We know environmental benefits are there from avoided transport things. But these were all of these three were very hard to measure precisely. And I didn't want to start saying, well, if you have this happen, then you'll get this outcome, because then you start to unpick things. The starting a business, Jess mentioned earlier, regional Australia. And, I've been looking, wearing different hats at what, for example, the net zero transition might mean for areas like the Hunter. And being able to have local small businesses is a really important part of economic development, particularly as our economy evolves. We continue to be a much more service-based economy, and so online is a very detailed part of that. But the one I just want to finish on talking about was education benefits. We know from the COVID lockdown that kids who didn't have access to solid data, internet access, let alone the skills, were really disadvantaged, very heavily disadvantaged. Now, I don't know if anyone from the New South Wales government is online, but I would love to know. I know they gave out dongles to certain areas, and I would love to be able to kind of compare cohorts who got dongles with those that didn't, and have a look at the ICT, the NAT ICT results, and see if we could do something. But even if you took a very conservative approach, we know that the New South Wales government's research shows that attitudes to homework have about a 5% explanatory value for school completions. And we know that completing school year 12 rather than year 10, lifetime outcomes around about $1 million per person in terms of increased income and avoided things like transfer payments, welfare payments, and more adverse health, homelessness, the list goes on. So those benefits are very, very large. Even if you took only, say, a 2% effect size, you would increase our total benefits by 40%. That's huge, and that's very conservative. I would love to see a lot more research in that space, I think we've scratched the surface here, and we've done a good job to find, some values that we know we can stand with our hand on our heart and say we're confident in these values. I would like to thank Jess and the team at Good Things, Tia particularly, and Parasikimian, who my researcher, who helped me enormously with an awful lot of this data, and to our academic peer group as well. This was not a solo act by any means. So I'd like to thank everybody who helped me with this work. I really hope it will get taken further from here. But that's a good point, I think, for me to stop and to hand over to Tricia, and I'll just stop sharing now, hopefully. Look, there we go.
Thank you so much, Nicki. It's just quite astounding, I think, to see that it is close to $500 million a year impact on the economy, just on that 1 in 10 level. And that, the conservative nature that we took, I think, is absolutely the right one, despite the fact that I did say to Nicki, surely we can make this higher, because there's more people that are affected by this. But I do think it really highlights the importance of continuous research in this space, and the ability to be able to track whether this continues to increase, because one of the key things, I think, is around the speed at which digital is being taken up. And I know you say in the report that that AI and the adoption of generative AI within our community is likely to make that even more significant. So, yeah.
In all sorts of ways, yes.
Absolutely. Just before we move to Trish, I wanted to say a huge thanks to the Outer Foundation, who supported provided the funding for us to be able to do this. I know there's a couple of you online today, so thank you for this. It is something that I have been wanting to get this report done, this research done, for the last 7 years, since Good Things started in Australia, really. And so it is brilliant to finally have it out in the world. Please, before I introduce Trish, please, if you have questions for Nicki, you have comments, thoughts. I noticed there's a couple of comments in the chat panel. Please put your questions in the Q&A, so that once Trish has finished speaking, then we'll have that opportunity to talk more with Nicki and answer your questions. So my pleasure now to introduce Trish. I think I'm going to share your slides, Trish, so I will do that, and then over to you.
Thank you, Jess and Nicki. Hello, I'm Trish. I'm from the beautiful Yuin country on the far south coast, Eurobodalla region. So we go from Bateman's Bay all the way down to and beyond Narooma. So it's lovely to be here with you all today. And if I can get you to set a thought, and just imagine that you've never used technology before. I want to introduce you to Lynn. Thanks, Jess. Lynn's story is all about social inclusion and beyond. Lynn is a member of the U3A choir, which has over 80 senior members. Just imagine that COVID was fast approaching when Lynn came to me and said, we don't have much time. These people are going to be left behind, and they will be completely on their own if we can't do something to help support them. So what we did was some very quick sessions on learning how to use Zoom. And we taught all of those 80 people how to be able to connect with Zoom so that they could connect and share their stories. And for over 6 weeks, we supported the choir online to ensure that everybody could connect. We also made sure that anyone who was having difficulties, that one of us would phone them, hold their hand, and work them through the process of connecting to Zoom. So for the first 6 weeks, it was very noisy, very funny, very engaging. Some jokes were told, and there were a lot of interesting articles that were shared among people. Anybody having, some people were able to at that point visit others. But what I found quite interesting is that it only took about 4 weeks for them to discover mute. So Lynn's story is a very important one because this is exactly what happens in particularly people over the age of 60 who may not have had a device before and find themselves in a situation where they've either been handed a device, they've purchased one, they may not necessarily be able to use that. Thanks, Jess. So that's Lynn there. Yes, so it was an interesting stage, particularly during COVID, but I have to say that the majority of weeks that Lynn was there to support the learners for the entire lockdown process. So I have to say they told so many stories, and I found myself there listening, singing along, participating in jokes, and some of the time it brought me to tears. It was such an enjoyable time in such a difficult time as well. So everybody embraced the technology, which was a surprise, and those people now continue to meet all these years later and have improved their tech skills very highly. Thanks, Jess. Okay, I'd like to also introduce you to Louise. This is Louise and Peter's story, and it's a story about old technology and cybersecurity. Louise and Peter, in Louise's words, Louise is a digital mentor from Narrandera, and that's quite a rural area of Australia. So in Louise's words, Eve, who is a fellow trainee mentor, and I was standing outside the Narrandera Library after a session with Tricia from the Tec Exec. I saw my husband Peter drive past, which I thought was unusual. So I went home to see if he was okay. When I arrived home, Peter was on his phone talking to somebody whilst looking at the computer. I heard a male person on the phone say, "Don't tell your wife." Peter was scratching a code off a prepaid card, and I asked what he was doing. Peter was concentrating on what he was doing and didn't want to be interrupted. He continued to do what he was doing and chat away to the gentleman on the phone. I could hear the person instructing him what to do with a series of gift cards that he had purchased from the local shops. Although the person sounded very helpful and sounded like a professional technician and stated that he was from the ACCC, the screen didn't look like a normal screen. And because he said, "Don't tell your wife," I was very skeptical. I tried to tell Peter that it was a scam, but he wouldn't listen. I even wrote it on a piece of paper and tried to get him to disconnect from the phone. He was convinced that it wasn't a scam. So I called Trish Pye and explained the situation to her. I spoke with Peter myself, and through our conversations, I had met him previously the night before at dinner after our training session. So I feel that we had built some trust between us. So based on this conversation that we had on the phone, Peter was able to disconnect from the phone, and we further instructed them to disconnect their internet connection and turn off their computers. It was a very expensive mistake in the long term. And the initial message that Peter clicked on was a message from Microsoft that had come up on his old laptop. The Microsoft link linked him outside to a hacker who had convinced him that he needed to pay for his new subscription. Like the 3G network, old technology can be unsafe and has vulnerabilities. It is more common for these technologies to also be under cyber attacks. So that's something that we really do need to let our older community know, or anybody who has an older device. Thanks, Jess. On to Eve, another mentor from Narendra. We had a guest speaker while we were running a digital mentor training program in Narendra. And if anybody is new to Narendra, it is located about an hour west of Wagga in New South Wales. We had a guest speaker from the ambulance service who came along to teach us about emergency preparedness and what to do in the event of an emergency. And he introduced us to the Emergency Plus app. The Emergency Plus app is an app that you can download onto your phone, and it has a lot of emergency procedures and videos included with it. But in the case of Eve, Eve went to the city, the big smoke, as she called it, to visit a family member. They went out for lunch. Eve wasn't prepared for what was about to happen next. She didn't know where she was, and her family member suffered a medical episode. The medical episode was so bad that Eve needed to call an ambulance. Unfortunately, because she was in an area she didn't know, she wasn't sure where she was, what floor she was on, and what the nearest cross street was. She was not familiar with the process of what needed to happen within the cafe that they were in. From inside the Emergency Plus app, her trusty friend, and she explained her situation. The operator asked her for the 3 words that were located in the location part of the app. These 3 words enabled the emergency services to pinpoint her exact location. The location was given to the emergency services, and they were able to arrive at the cafe within a designated time. The outcome of this event was very positive, and it proves to us that technology can save lives. Thanks, Jess. Jenny is a digital mentor located in Narooma on the far south coast. Jenny is a Be Connected Network partner and has been helping us deliver capacity building training programs in the Eurobodalla over the past 5 years. As a Be Connected Network partner, we receive several capacity builder grants. This grant enables us to build capacity by training local volunteers to become digital mentors using a train the trainer model in the Eurobodalla and Riverina areas. These mentors are local and understand the region, its challenges, demographics, and they're usually members of many local community groups. Helping to further reach other learners, we've been able to deliver capacity building programs within the regions and now have many mentors in the location. These mentors have been able to train newbies who come to these sessions for a lunch and coffee every Monday morning. The sessions they started off as training sessions, but they've actually become more along the lines of a social meetup. They can come along, share stories, train each other, and have lunch and, of course, a cuppa. The newbies, or the oldies teach the newbies, and they have a good old time. I'm very happy to announce that we've received this grant again, so we'll be able to deliver more digital mentors to the community in the Eurobodalla over the coming 12 months. We've been able to establish many community connections, and the Connect Eurobodalla program will be released next year. Thanks, Jess. All of these gorgeous ladies that you can see are some of our regional and rural digital mentors. Lynn, as you can see, is supporting learners. Lynn's using voice-activated technology. Not only is she a digital mentor involved in many local groups, Lynn actually used to own a bookshop, and she was always passionate about writing her own book. Next week, she has released her book, and she'll be having her first author talk in our region. And I'm going to go along and check that out and listen to what Lynn has to say. Her book was written using voice-activated technology and a little bit of AI along the way. She still has many groups that she's part of and participates in digital mentoring programs. Next is Louise. Louise is supporting more learners in Narrandera since completing her digital mentor training. She's managed to buy a new computer for herself and her partner, Peter, who had the Microsoft incident. She is ensuring that everybody in Narrandera understands cybersecurity and making sure that they have the technology and the software that they need to keep them safe online. Eve is supporting individuals locally to gain digital skills and make sure everybody downloads the Emergency Plus app. And that's a big one from us. We want to make sure that everybody's got the Emergency Plus app because it really does help. It also has inside the Emergency Plus app videos on how to perform resuscitation. So it's a bit of a game changer as far as that technology goes. Eve is also keen to support rural community groups next year, and hopefully we'll be able to apply for a new Be Connected group grant for that location. Jenny has completed her lead digital mentor training just recently, and we'll be helping launch new hubs like the one that we set up for social inclusion in Narooma in various other locations in the Eurobodalla. She's keen to help train new digital mentors and deliver capacity building training across the Eurobodalla region. All of this is possible because of the Be Connected program and the guidance of Good Things Foundation. And on behalf of all of us, we thank you very much. And thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you so much, Trish. I mean, it is brilliant to be hearing both the real stories of digital inclusion and what it actually means to people in the community, alongside the real benefits to the economy that we might have by making sure everybody is connected. And I had the absolute pleasure to meet Louise and Eve when we launched this report in Parliament House. They came all the way from Narrandera to be with us, and it was fantastic to hear. And I know that Louise particularly talked about the increased confidence she has, not just in her being able to deliver digital skills programs and be a digital mentor, but in her life, actually. By feeling confident to use technology, it builds people's confidence to be participating in a whole lot of other community activities. And I know that Louise and Eve are very busy in the Narrandera community. So if you ever go out to Narrandera, anyone, I highly recommend that you reach out to Eve and Louise, because they will direct you to all of the fabulous things to do in the community. We have come to the point in our webinar now where it's a time to ask questions. So we are very happy to take questions for myself, for Trish, for Nicki, on any of the things that you've heard today. And so if you would like to, please put some comments in the chat. Please put some questions in the Q&A. I know we do have one question to start us off. And this is from Ricky, Ricky Andrews from ADIA. So fabulous. Hi, Ricky. Thank you again for the funding. Brilliant to have that support. Ricky's question is, how often do we think we need to do this research? So, like we've done it once. This is the first of its kind here in Australia. It's been done elsewhere, but this is the first economic benefit report of its kind. I mean, I'm curious, Nicki, like how often do you think it's useful to do this kind of report and analysis?
So thanks. It is a good question. Thanks, Ricky. And I think there's two aspects to this. One is to, rather than sort of framing it as repeating the report, is to expand the research. And I think that's really important. There's a lot more that could be done, I think, especially around education, because I think that's just, if state governments aren't thinking about this, and possibly federal, then they absolutely should, because it's totally embedded in the sorts of outcomes that we're going to get, and increasingly so. We know kids are, some kids are accessing ChatGPT. There's now going to be a watermark so teachers can tell whether they've accessed ChatGPT, and that might be fine, or Sora, or whichever one they're using. I believe Google's now gone ahead OpenAI in terms of access. But all of these things, we need to know what our kids are doing, and making sure there's a level playing field for all of them. So I would love to see that extended, you know, in the year ahead, if possible. Obviously, the other things, you know, I think the trends that we're seeing in things like employment, even in things like volunteering in online services, these are changing so rapidly. Like, you can't keep redoing these reports every 5 seconds, but it would be good to, you know, in maybe 3 to 4 years' time, to just do a review of some of the data and see whether there's been any significant changes there, and, you know, what are we learning from that about the priorities in terms of what are the areas that need the most focus. But I think there's such a strong case to follow up on things like starting your own business and those sorts of things. I know an example of one social enterprise that is doing nothing but helping people who are caring for those with a disability to, as a side hustle, to set up an online business. So with people with no, you know, very little skills. So, you know, these are the sorts of things we want to see happen, to have people more engaged, both economically and socially. So some of it's more immediate and kind of you could do any time, and some of it should be revisited in certainly in a few years.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, absolutely great. And I would probably say the same thing, Nicki. I think I've already been asked this question from a couple of key stakeholders I've met and shared the report with, is, well, what happened to the education outcomes? Like, why didn't we have anything in there? And so I think, you know, that need to really look into some of those bits that were not available is really, really important. And if we could do that and get that to happen, it would be really, really interesting research. So yes, Nicki?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I did flag in the report the education and the potential sort of value of those outcomes as a kind of teaser to maybe get some partnerships going with state governments who I think would be very interested in that sort of outcome. Anyway, we'll see.
That's really interesting, because we've had another question actually that's come through around the kind of reception that we've had to this report from politicians and people in government. And so, I mean, I can probably answer that a little bit. We definitely had some great people coming to Parliament House. I think it was a very, very busy day in Parliament House the day that we were there, a shortened week in Parliament, and a lot of bells going off all of the time. So I think, you know, from my initial perspective, we didn't get it. You know, we definitely had the Assistant Minister, Kate Thwaites, you know, launch the report, which was fantastic. So great to have commitment from the government to be there and to launch the report and to kind of acknowledge the importance of digital inclusion. But I suppose the key thing from us is using this as a follow-up and using this as a key piece of research in our advocacy around the next election federally. But I also know that state governments, and particularly public servants in state governments, have been really interested in this report and have been using it already. So, you know, we've had some really good reception. I think this is a piece of research that will be really useful in the next couple of years. So I expect that it will continue to be used throughout that. Well, I hope so anyway. And, you know, definitely from the initial feedback we've had, that people are finding it really useful. So that's fantastic. Okay, I have another question, which is probably more around the evidence, Nicki. So I'm going to go back to you around some of the evidence. So this is a question from Carol, and she's asking about the references of, do we have references of evidence showing a link between digital exclusion and health outcomes? Like, were there things, I know we couldn't kind of link that too much yet, but were there things that we had that we could say, well, there's improved health outcomes as a result of this? Or were there things that is that something we need to do more on as well?
It's a little bit of both. So there's some great research in Australia by one professor with the unusual name of Snoswell, and he's done some amazing research, but it's quite small. So I think I mentioned before the evidence around clinics that were able to see more people, so an efficiency point of view, but there's also some evidence around the health outcomes. It's just not consistent. And that's the problem, is that some studies showed, and they all tend to be quite small, some showed in some very, very specific clinical cases a, small improvement. Others didn't show it. So we really need to have a lot more going on. But it's hard to imagine that actually just that access piece. We know that, the longer you leave something, the harder it is often to sort it. So if we're getting people to get seen and treated quicker and more often, then that's got to be surely a good thing for overall outcomes. And of course, there are some things where we're helping people with complex chronic conditions to be able to have telehealth services, support services, to make sure that they're taking their medications and things. But again, the focus has always been on around the time and the convenience of that, rather than did that actually improve the outcomes. And these things become quite difficult because, as with education, if you're going to do some sort of clinical trial, you've got to have a have-not versus a haves. And once you know there's something wrong with somebody, or somebody's excluded, you don't want to say, well, sorry, we're going to withhold treatment from you. Maybe we're giving it in a more conventional way, but you've got to be, the ethics of this become quite tricky as well. So we'll have to wait a little bit more for some more detailed evidence, but I can't help but think, just logically, sensibly, that there should be benefits here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's another area, isn't it? It's the thing that we found quite a few of these, is that there's small reports on small pieces of research that show outcomes, but the stuff at scale is just not there in terms of the impact of digital inclusion on that. So
and health was the one that was most conflicted.
Yeah,
just weren't consistent outcomes enough for us to be able to, unfortunately, say anything.
Yeah. Great. Well, Trish, I'm going to give this next question to you, because this question is really around, the impact of digital inclusion and how directly it can influence employment and job readiness, especially amongst marginalised communities. So I know that you provide a lot of support to people in your community to learn about technology. What are your thoughts around about, what happens when you support someone to have digital skills? Does that actually support them to then get a job, or to get to move from, not having a job to having a volunteer, role? What are your experiences there?
We actually did a report ourselves quite a few years ago, because my background is actually IT and business training.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first moved from the city down to the Eurobodalla, I'd gone from teaching desktop publishing and spreadsheets and high-level computing to coming here and then going back to teaching people how to type and how to use the internet and those sorts of things. So we have done a lot of research around that, and we've partnered with some local councils to ensure that digital skills are there, and created a benchmark so that people can connect online for participating in online interviews. But not only that, actually understanding what a PDF is. We've got digital signatures, things that need to be signed. And it's not just older people who struggle, it's all ages. So we're putting a little bit of a plan in to make sure that we can actually provide training for anyone who needs it, so that they can ultimately have the benefit of being able to apply for a position that they may not have been able to before. And I always consider that technology is global. So if we want to be able to apply for a job down the street, we could literally walk in the door. Now with technology, and particularly things like digital marketing and education, we can apply for jobs all over the world. And the sky's the limit there. There's nothing holding us back.
Yeah, I agree, Trish. And I think, what I would add to that, we know that, the Productivity Commission, this is a couple of years ago, said 87% of jobs now need digital skills. I actually think it's higher than that. now. It's very close to all jobs need some sort of digital skills. So I think, the link between building your digital literacy and digital skills and getting a job is significant. And also I would say that that we know that some people who look like they are digitally included, so people, particularly younger people, we've heard that younger people look like they are digitally included because they have a phone and they are very, very passionate and social on social media or using games. But if you ask them to be able to write an email or to do something that is around applying for a job or something outside that kind of social space, then it's much more difficult. And so I think there is an importance for us to think about what are the different levels of skill that we need to have. And I know that the ADIA and Ishtar and the team have been working really closely with the Future Skills organisation, looking at, a digital capability framework and getting that adopted for Australia so that we know what people need for, what kind of digital skills people need for work, life and learning,
If I can just...
Yeah.
Sorry, Jess, add one thing to that. Something that came up in the conversation yesterday was, yes, we all have... all the young people do have a smartphone in their hand, but just imagine trying to fill out an application on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Filling out a job application on a smartphone is quite tricky to do. We do, and we're getting support for that in the chat panel, Trish. We have one last question here, and if other people have questions, please feel free. Otherwise, we may finish up a little bit early today. But the last question is really a very helpful one, and probably for all of us, really, and all of us online, and a good one for an ADIA webinar is, how do we reach broader stakeholders with the findings of this report so we can expand funding to support the scaling? So, I mean, I could answer that, but I'm gonna hand to Nicki first to kind of see, what do you think? What is the benefit of doing an economic report? How do we get this out? What's useful about that in influencing policy decisions?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential in this day and age. We know budgets are always under pressure. And if you can't demonstrate an economic value of what you're doing in some way, shape or form, you've got almost no chance of getting funding. It doesn't, just because you can demonstrate value doesn't mean that you're going to get it, but it's a big, big help. And with something like this that is so far reaching in so many ways, that goes to the heart of government objectives around employment creation, around the whole ethos of MyGov services, that is to deliver those services online. They need to make sure that everybody can access them once they are delivering them. It's a bit like when we got rid of checks, which I think is 0.01% of transactions now. How are people able to access their financial services accurately and be able to do it? Because that's the way the world is. And it's all very well for us to say this is going to deliver productivity benefits, but if we're leaving a whole class of people behind, creating inequality and leaving economic gains on the table, then that's not in anybody's interest. And Treasuries love to hear about the benefits that they don't want to fund things that feel good. They want to fund things that they know are going to actually deliver those dollar values. It's incredibly important to them. And I think this report shows how diverse those benefits are, from both social impact and that economic inclusion as well. So I think, there certainly was the fact that we got an assistant minister to turn up, shows that it's something that is definitely on their radar. And I think, some of the things that are raised, even the questions that weren't answered, should spruik interest. If I were a state education minister or somebody senior in a department, I'd be looking at this and saying, right, this is absolutely critical. We are trying to make sure we improve outcomes, education outcomes. It has such an important, not just economic, but social impact through everyone's lives. I'd be wanting to know more about it. So I think, we've got to keep raising the flag. I'm not a lobbyist. I just crunch the numbers. But I do see that these things, you know, there are a lot of economic reports out there, and that's why it's really important to have credibility, to be robust, but also to make sure, you know, in something like this, you're just covering something that hits so many targets and ticks so many boxes for politicians to make and bureaucrats to make funding decisions on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Nicki, and I think that's why I'm so thrilled to have this report, because it does speak to, you know, a different part of government and you know, recommend that not only the social benefits but the economic benefits. And what I would say is that we are right at the start of an election cycle for the federal government. We still do not have a national digital inclusion strategy in Australia, which just seems crazy to me in this time. And so, you know, I would put this back to the people that are on the online today and encourage you to use this report to advocate for digital inclusion in Australia. I know that ADIA has a roadmap, and we're definitely working to advocate for further investment in digital inclusion strategies. And there have been some, you know, developments, and since in the last few years, there's a First Nations digital inclusion advisory group and a roadmap as well, which is fantastic, and some funding's been put behind it, so that's brilliant. But there, you know, if we really looked at the 1 in 4 and not just the 1 in 10, the benefit to the economy and to our society would be significant if we make sure that everyone is included. So, I mean, my recommendation is that please use this report, download the report. Hopefully it is useful to you in your advocacy efforts, and also join us at Good Things. If you want to be part of delivering programs like Tricia's talked about, you know, please join our network and come and look at the resources and the funding that we have available, but also join the ADIA so that together we can advocate for change across Australia for those who need it. I think that is pretty much it, unless people have last questions. I think we might even call it a day there. So I would just like to say another huge thank you to you, Nicki, and to Trish for bringing the economics and the social benefits together in this webinar. It's been such a great pleasure to work with both of you over the years, but also to host this webinar with you today. And thanks to the ADIA, Ishtar and Tim behind the scenes who have helped us, and to the team at Good Things who have also worked very hard to launch this report. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And please be in touch if you would like to you know, talk more about digital inclusion. We're always up for that. Thanks, everyone.